What's going on, English 108? Here we are at the start of week 5, and so we've finished our first major assignment sequence of the semester, which is our resume and cover letter. So hopefully you feel pretty good about those and are wrapping up any final revisions that you have for those particular documents. I'd ask that if you need any additional help, you reach out to me sooner rather than later so that we can get those turned in by Thursday. And, just as a reminder, these are pretty high-stakes documents, and there's an expectation that they'll be in pretty good shape when they're in final draft form. So I'm going to have a pretty low tolerance for careless errors and mistakes, and that's mostly because that's how those documents are usually interpreted, and we've also spent the better part of about a month working on those. So it's my expectation that you've put a lot of time and thought into those, and that you've really scrutinized every letter, every word, every sentence, every bullet point to make sure that it contributes to a very favorable portrait of you as somebody who possesses a lot of transferable and relevant skills for a particular position. So as we put that assignment to bed and we start to think about our next task, we're really going to start writing about things. And the way that I like to do that in this class, and I've tried a variety of different assignment iterations, but the way that I like to do it is to have you write a review of a product that you have some experience with. And the reason that we do that is not only because I think it's important to be able to write to evaluate or to assess, because that's a pretty common type of writing or genre of writing in the workplace. I also think it's important because it forces us to do a number of things really well. The first of which is we have to be very mindful of our language. And I'm going to ask that you write this to a regular consumer, somebody who possesses roughly the same amount of knowledge that you do about whatever the thing is. And so that's going to force us to be really mindful of jargon. When we start talking about things, tools, pieces of equipment, it's really easy to go off the deep end with highly specialized language and to focus really closely on specifications and features. And so we've probably all experienced this at one point or another. We're a bystander to a conversation of two experts. I'll use an example from my life. I could be having a conversation with somebody else who loves fly fishing like I do, and we could have a whole conversation, and it's likely that you wouldn't have any idea what we were talking about because we'd be talking about, aerial mens and stack mens and, golden stoneflies and things like that may or may not mean anything to you. And so the important thing to remember is that as members of a college community, we're here gaining a whole new set of knowledge that comes with a whole new set of language. And we've been doing this all along, actually. We've all had hobbies or things that we do that we become uniquely qualified in, or we become experts in, or we just become immersed in, because really we're all part of these what we call discourse communities, where we share a language to talk about a particular thing. So when you're writing your review, it's really easy, especially if you're an expert in something or you have a lot of familiarity in something, to really start to use language that to the average person is pretty meaningless. And so that's one of the things that we're going to have to be very mindful of. It's easy to start talking about specialized materials like titanium alloy, or particular types of textures, like it has a knurled knob. I can give you a million examples, but the key is that we have to talk about those things relative to their significance to the reader, and that's really what this assignment gets us to think about, because in an environment where we're dealing with technical content or information, the important thing is to always tie it back to significance. How is it significant to your reader, and how does it intersect or interact with their life? And so we're going to have to practice doing that. We're also going to have to practice supporting claims with evidence, which is an important skill. So you're probably going to make a series of claims about whatever the product is that you're reviewing. You might say it's the most durable pair of shoes you've ever owned. You might say it's the most accurate rifle you've ever shot. You might say it's the most comfortable pair of jeans you've ever purchased. Those are all claims, and they all require evidence. And so one of the things that we know is when we seek out reviews or assessments, we're generally using those to make some type of decision. And your credibility as the writer of that review is really predicated on how well you support the various claims that you make. So as we move into this assignment, I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things really well. One of those things is I'm going to ask you to come up with a set of criteria by which you want to evaluate that product. So whenever we're evaluating something, we kind of want to be systematic and scientific about it. And that means that we probably want to have a set of specific things that we're looking at. And usually those are the things that matter in a consumer type decision. So and they're also context dependent. So, one of the common things that people review in this class is their shoes, actually, believe it or not, or their boots. And, the review really is predicated on how those shoes or those boots are used, what type of environment they're used in, what application they're used for, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just take a pair. I have a lot of culinary students this semester, so this happens to be on my mind, and they have very particular footwear needs. Let's say that you're in the market or you're trying to select a pair of shoes to wear in a kitchen environment. There are very specific things that you're probably concerned about. Things that, frankly, somebody who works on an asphalt crew would not be concerned about, or somebody who works in retail would not be concerned about. And so that's going to be really the backbone of your review, are those criteria. So somebody who's looking for a pair of shoes to work in a kitchen is probably looking for a pair of shoes that's really comfortable in standing environments or standing conditions for long periods of time. They're probably looking for something that is durable and going to stand up over time. You're probably looking for something that's stain resistant. You're probably looking for something that's going to have a long period of useful use, so that it has a good lifespan, if you will. So these are all things that people are going to be looking for. Price obviously plays into these things, etc. But you got to have a really good set of criteria that match the context and the use of that particular product. So that's the first thing. Then I'm going to ask you to make a series of claims based on those criteria. So you might say they're relatively durable, which actually isn't a really good claim. You might say, compared to other shoes that I've worn, they're right in the middle of the road. They're just, average. In which case, you're going to have to support that. So when we start to support these claims or make these claims about these various criteria, there's a couple of things that we want to keep in mind. One is that evidence is really important here. So what's your evidence of that claim? Obviously, I just forecasted one of the ways that we can support a claim when we're assessing something is to make a comparison. How does it compare to some other similar thing? And similar is the operative word there. We don't want to go comparing apples to oranges. So obviously, one of the constraining factors here is price point. Purchasing something at a particular price point usually dictates its relative competitors. So we don't want to compare a $30 pair of shoes that we bought at Walmart to a $300 pair of shoes that we bought in a specialty footwear store, for instance, because that's not a very generative, usually a very generative type of comparison. So we can make comparisons. We can talk about our personal experience, and I hope that you do this. So if you say that, for instance, they're the most comfortable shoes you've ever worn, I want you to tell me how you know that. What types of use did you put them through? Again, those comparisons would be really helpful. And then the other thing that you could do, and really the best case scenario is that you're layering these three types of evidence onto each other, is you can talk about their actual construction or their specifications or details or features about the shoe. So you can talk about the way that the sole is constructed or the way that it supports your arch or the way that the tongue is engineered, whatever it is. But the key is we're going to have a really good set of criteria that would help somebody make a consumer decision. We're not going to include extraneous or superfluous stuff that's not necessary. We're going to make good claims about those various criteria. They're the most durable, they're not worth the money, etc. And then we're going to support those claims with evidence. Okay, and that's really important because that's going to force you to think really carefully about what types of evidence is going to illustrate your claim the best or the most usefully. And then finally, we're going to make sure that at the end of the day, our review says one friggin' thing. And that's S-O-F-T. You'll see me write that sometimes on your paper. And what that means is that there's a clear, discernible, underlying message of your review. It's sort of like the one-sentence takeaway. These shoes were great for the price, but they don't match up to shoes at a higher price point, for instance. Or these shoes are worth every penny because they're the most comfortable, most durable shoes I've ever owned, or whatever. It's really that one-sentence Cliff's Notes version of your review, and usually, a lot of times that ends up being the takeaway that a reader has from that type of reading experience. So this exercise in writing a review is really going to exercise a lot of muscles, and you're going to have to practice writing objectively. So that's one thing that folks tend to get kind of confused on. I'm asking you to write an objective review or an assessment of a product. I'm not asking you to sell me this product. I'm not asking you to be the biggest fan of this product. You can pick something that you frankly didn't have a very good experience with and write a very good review. That's fine. And I'm not going to limit what you review. You can review whatever you want, but I think I give some pretty good guidelines. It's a lot easier to review a tool or a piece of equipment than it is to review other types of things. Like every semester I have somebody who wants to review a video game, and that's fine, but that's a really complex thing to review in a relatively short amount of space. So just be very careful about that. You always have to kind of think about does the does the assignment scope and scale really match the topic that I want to choose? But by all means, choose something that you have some experience with and tell us about it. And base that review on a set of criteria that you think will be meaningful to your reader. Now, one of the other things that we're going to see is that how we organize and how we format this document is going to go a long way in how useful it is to our reader. So one of the things that I want you to note from the various examples that I'm having you read is that you can play around with how you decide to segment or chunk this document. Chances are nobody's going to want to read a giant text wall, a 72-line paragraph that covers every aspect of the product in one fell swoop. Instead, what we're probably going to want to do is compartmentalize that information into small chunks. Typically, that's organized around criteria. So you might have a section with a heading about comfort, and then you might have one about accuracy if we're talking about a rifle, and then you might have one about cost or whatever. But we're really going to try to provide things in very compartmentalized ways, and the reason that we do that is manyfold. One, we do it because it just makes the document more attractive. People tend to want to read documents that are well compartmentalized and chunked. The other thing is that people a lot of times come to these documents and they are looking for a very particular thing. They have one thing in mind. They want the most accurate, or they want the most cost-effective, or they want the most efficient. And they're going to go directly to that section. If we have everything put into a big homogeneous blob, it's going to be very hard for that person to locate what they're looking for. So what we want to do is create a useful and user-friendly reading experience where somebody can find the content that they really care about. And we have to remember that in a workplace environment and in a professional setting, our readers are generally very reluctant. Reading these types of things tends to cut into other things that they could be doing, things that are oftentimes more profitable or perceived as being more important. So we have to sort of rid ourselves of the myth that our readers are going to read sequentially and thoroughly, that they're going to start in the upper left-hand corner and end in the bottom right-hand corner. Generally speaking, and you saw this when you wrote about your textbooks, readers are likely to scan and to find the information that solves their most immediate problem the best. So that's something that we really want to keep in mind. And you're going to see that in the example of the tent that I've posted. It's very well compartmentalized, very easy to read, it's very well organized, and so we're going to really think about that too. That's another skill that's going to be practiced. So there's a lot that's going on in this assignment. You're going to have to practice a lot of important writing skills, ranging from the way that you organize the document to how well you support your claims with evidence, how well how good and detailed your writing is, because you can't reside at a level of abstraction when you're writing about things to review them. You actually have to zoom in and talk to us about the fabric that your windbreaker is made out of and describe it in some meaningful way. You have to explain why the motor in your lawnmower is so effective at doing what it does, and you have to do that in a way ultimately that's user-friendly. So this is our first foray into content other than ourselves, and what that's going to cause us or force us to do is to think really carefully about each word that we put on the page and make sure that it adds value to the reader's experience and that it's congruent with what we're trying to do. Because ultimately people come to reviews not only to get information about a product, but also to read well-reasoned and credible assessments of that product against a set of user-friendly criteria. So that's what we're up against. So I look forward to reading what you come up with for your resumes and cover letters, and I hope that you have fun writing this review. Ultimately, it's a fun assignment, and hopefully we can produce reviews that are really insightful, that are really detailed, and that ultimately would be really helpful if somebody was trying to make a consumer-type decision, and that's all that I can ask. And in so doing, we're going to have to command language, we're going to have to think really carefully about how we put stuff on the page, and we're going to have to include really relevant, important details, and ultimately we want to focus on benefits, not features. It's really easy to fixate on features, which are the sort of inanimate and decontextualized data points. They're the 2.33 gigahertz processor. They're the 2.5 horsepower motor. They're the 400 denier fabric or whatever it is. And those are just features, and without context and without clearly explaining the significance of those things, they're pretty meaningless to a reader. When we start to talk about them as benefits, or in some cases when we're being really objective, maybe not so benefits, those things are really important. So I look forward to seeing what you come up with for your drafts. I hope that the process of reading the 2 examples this week really gives you some sense of what you might do. I encourage you to look on the vast World Wide Web for other examples, because one of the things that we need to do as writers is to really, before we begin writing often, is really get a handle on what the the opportunities are with a particular genre or type of writing. What can we do? What should we do? And we should always match that to our audience in our particular instance. So I look forward to seeing what you come up with. If you have any questions or concerns, or if you need to meet with me individually, I'm happy to do so. You know how to get in touch with me. And thanks a lot.